Hi guys, so the beginning of the discussion between Boris Johnson and the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, was about Scottish devolution, how Scottish devolution was a disaster according to Boris Johnson. But what I want to focus on is the second part of their discussion, which is about corruption and PPE. So let's hear what they had to say.
Turning now to the Prime Minister's handling of the pandemic. The Prime Minister is doing the right thing by self-isolating after being notified by track and trace. But does he think he would have been able to do so if, like so many other people across the country, all he had to rely on for the next 14 days was either statutory sick pay, which is £95 a week, that's £13 a day, or a one-off payment of £500, which works out at £35 a day?
Keir Starmer is very clever here. I think he's doing the right thing. What he's doing is he's talking about numbers that ordinary people can identify with. The problem with the government is that they dish out these numbers of, like, we're spending 100 billion here and 10 million there, and we're spending, we're leveling up, and we're using all these types of slogans. And these don't resonate with people. People don't care how much universal credit has been increased by, what percentage, or how much, how many millions have been added to it. They care about how much they as individuals get. So it's interesting that Keir Starmer suggested that Boris Johnson, does he understand? Of course, Boris Johnson's not on £95 a week, but let's hear what the Prime Minister had to say.
Prime Minister.
Well, it's good finally to hear something from the right honourable gentleman in praise of NHS test and trace.
So, of course, he doesn't answer the question. Would he be able to survive on £95 a week or £500 once-off payment? And he goes straight to, thanks for supporting NHS test and trace. And stop calling it NHS test and trace. It's Serco test and trace. Anyway, would Boris Johnson, is Boris Johnson on £95 a week? Well, Boris Johnson, is putting his arms around the nation, understanding the financial difficulties that they're going through.
I think they secured at least one of his objectives, which is to keep me away from answering his questions in person. What I can say to him is that I believe that the package that we have in place to protect people and support people throughout this crisis has been outstanding.
Okay, so £95 a week. So, Boris, would you be able to survive on £95 a week? Well, Boris has complained in the past how, £150,000 a year is a struggle. You may think, as you look at the screen, that Boris Johnson is wearing a suit from probably Savile Row. It is probably a suit from Savile Row, but he didn't buy it in Savile Row. He bought it in Oxfam, in a charity shop. He probably paid about 50 quid for it and haggled for about an hour. Or maybe less than 50 quid. You can't see his elbows, but there are holes in that suit. So, Boris Johnson knows the struggle of living on £95 a week. I'm sure he does. Of course, he's not living on £95 a week, but £150,000 a year is a struggle for him. He has said on numerous occasions.
And exceptional. I think that the UK has put its arms, as I've said many times, around the people of this country, a £200 billion package of support, increasing the living wage by record amounts, uplifting universal credit, many loans and grants to businesses.
Once again, this is the contrast you have between Keir Starmer giving numbers that ordinary people can understand and Boris Johnson giving numbers that ordinary people cannot understand.
Of all kinds, and support for people who are self-isolating, £500 of support in addition to all the other benefits and support that we give. I do think it's a reasonable package, Mr. Speaker. I know it's tough for people who have...
He knows it's tough, yes. He's on £150,000 a year. He knows, what it's like. Okay, maybe he doesn't know exactly, but he has a feeling what it's like to live on £95 a week. Really, you have to trust Boris, okay? You have to trust him.
Have to self-isolate, and I'm glad that after a long time in which he simply attacked NHS test and trace, he seems now to be coming around and supporting it.
He has never attacked it. He has attacked you for not running it correctly. He said if it's not working, there's a problem because maybe the wrong people are in charge. Maybe it's not receiving the right funding. Maybe it shouldn't be handed off to a private company like Serco.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take lectures on supporting. The lockdown measures were passed the other week with Labour votes. 32 of his own MPs broke a 3-line whip. And I hear that about 50 of them have joined a WhatsApp group to work out how they're going to oppose him next time round. He should be thanking us for our support, not criticising.
I think Keir Starmer then now moves on, but what he should have done here was continued on this point, saying, Prime Minister, are you going to thank us for helping you out, for getting you over this problem? Are you going to thank the Labour Party? You can thank the Labour Party. Come on, thank us. That's what he should, not as, you know, in a more elegant way than I'm presenting. But he should have forced this point because it would demonstrate that Boris Johnson is weak. Boris Johnson needs the Labour Party to get over these problems. I would have reinforced that point.
And as he well knows, so far as the £500 scheme is concerned, only 1 in 8 workers qualifies for that scheme. The Prime Minister always does this, talking about the number of people he's helping, but ignoring the huge numbers falling through the gap. Members here may be able to afford to self-isolate, but that's not the case for many people across the country who say...
Once again, connecting with ordinary people. Boris Johnson is not connecting with ordinary people. He's talking about abstract numbers. Keir Starmer is, you know, saying ordinary people, and he's making a very good contrast. He's saying people in Parliament are able to afford it. Ordinary people cannot.
Send us here. It's estimated that only about 11% of people self-isolate when they're asked to do so. 11%. That isn't because they don't want to. It's because many don't feel that they can afford to. So, for example, if you're a self-employed plumber, a construction worker, a photographer, and you don't qualify for social security benefits, or you run a small business and you can't work from home, you're likely to see a significant cut to your income if you have to self-isolate. This is affecting many families across the country. Does the Prime Minister recognise that if we want to increase the number of people who isolate, we need to make it easier and affordable for people to do so?
This is, you know, he's on fire here. I think he's really doing a fantastic job. He's holding Boris Johnson to account. Of course, Boris Johnson will ignore this, but he is, you know, his comments are resonating, sorry, with members of the public. He talked about plumbers. He talked about people with small businesses, the self-employed. Those are people who cannot self-isolate because they can't afford it. You know, the government can talk about, you know, if you have a problem, you must self-isolate. If, you know, if you have a problem, go and get a test. If you have a lot of people are afraid to either self-isolate because they can't afford it, or many people are afraid to get a test because they may be put in a position where they can't survive.
Going back to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, again, I do think that it is extraordinary that he's now coming out in favour of NHS test and trace when...
Does Boris Johnson just repeat the same talking points all the time? Oh, he was attacking test and trace. Now he's supporting NHS test and trace. Supporting. That's all Boris Johnson seems to have as a response.
He's continuously attacked it. In fact, the numbers that he gives for the success rate of NHS, of the self-isolation programme, according to my information, way too low. But we continue to encourage people to do the right thing.
The point he made was you can't encourage... There's no point just encouraging people. People need financial support. 1 in 8 are actually following the... are self-isolating. The others are not. That's a serious issue. What are you going to do to fix it? Encouraging people isn't working. You have been encouraging people. You've been encouraging people to follow the rules, to self-isolate since the beginning. If people can't financially self-isolate, they're not going to do it. And encouraging them isn't going to work either. It's easy for you to encourage people. It's easy for you to self-isolate because you're protected. You're not going to see a dip in your income. These people will. And if you have bills to pay, if you have a mortgage, if you're afraid that you won't be able to buy food, then you're going to take a risk. And I don't criticize these people for this. People will say, look, if I don't go to work, I'm not going to earn any money. And when I go to ask for support from the government, I'm not eligible. So what do I do?
It does break the chain of transmission of the disease. And as for the self-employed groups that he mentions, we've given £13.5 billion so far in support.
I'm sorry to be interrupting all the time, but once again, these numbers mean nothing to people. We've given £13 billion in support. We've given 100 million here. 100. It means nothing to people. So imagine a scenario where somebody's sitting at home and they say, okay, I'm going to listen to the Prime Minister and find out if he's going to fix this problem where I'm afraid to self-isolate because I'm risking losing my job or I'm risking losing my income. What's the Prime Minister going to say to help me as an individual? Well, we spent 100 million on this new self-isolation program. Okay, but how does that help me? Does it help me? Or am I on my own?
For self-employed people, uplifted universal credit in the way that I described. And what we want to do is to get the virus under control, get the R down below 1, which is the purpose of these current measures, encourage people to self-isolate in the way that I am, and thereby stop the disease.
But you encourage them to isolate in the same way as I am. But the people can't. Did you not actually listen to the question? Obviously, Boris Johnson doesn't need to listen to the question because he receives the questions beforehand. So he prepares his answer. This is not Boris Johnson not hearing the question because of the connection wasn't very good between him and Westminster. He has the questions beforehand. He has a team to help him answer the questions. He's deciding not to answer the question.
Disease from spreading, so that the firms, the professions, the businesses that he talks about can get back to to something as close to normality as soon as possible. In the meantime, we are giving them every possible support, Mr. Speaker.
But it's not working. You can say we're giving them every possible support, but if it's not working, people will go back to work, and then they will facilitate the spread, and then eventually they will not be working because you'll have to go into a lockdown.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must understand there's a huge gap in the system. Because if you can't afford to isolate, there's little point in being tested or traced. And whilst the Prime Minister and Chancellor won't pay people enough to isolate properly, we learnt this week that they can find £21 million of taxpayers' money to pay a go-between to deliver lucrative contracts to the Department of Health. £21 million. I remind the Prime Minister that a few weeks ago he couldn't find that amount of money for free school meals for kids over half-term. Does the Prime Minister think that £21 million to a middleman was an acceptable use of taxpayers' money?
And now we're on to the corruption. Now, I wish Keir Starmer would call it out for what it is. Corruption. Use the word corruption. Now, maybe he doesn't want to because he's building his case. I imagine he has a huge folder full with Boris Johnson's picture on the front of it. But I think he should call it out for what it is. It is corruption. Tory party donors are getting contracts because they're Tory party donors. It's as simple as that.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when this crisis began, we were being urged by the Right Honourable Gentleman to remove the blockages in our procurement process in order to get PPE. And
that did not mean that you give out contracts to Tory party donors, or you don't give out contracts to companies that have members of your government sitting on the board or working as consultants. And I've covered this in a number of videos already. Members, even the Minister for Health, not the Health Secretary, but the Minister for Health, works as a consultant for a private company, and that private company was awarded a contract. It's banana republic level of corruption.
We were facing, as you will remember, a very difficult situation where across the world there were not adequate supplies of PPE. Nobody had enough PPE. We shifted heaven and earth to get 32 billion items of PPE into this country.
A lie. That's a lie. I did a video on this during the pandemic, the first wave, where there was a company in the UK that produced PPE. They had reached out to the government and said, look, we have PPE. Do you need us? We manufacture it. We're ready to produce it for the government. They reached out to Boris Johnson's government and they received no reply. They reached out a number of times and they received no reply. While in the news, the government were saying, we can't find PPE, we're looking for PPE. The same company was producing PPE for the United States. Why was that the case? Because the government didn't want to hire that company, because that company wasn't donating to the Conservative Party.
I'm very proud of what has been achieved. 70% of PPE is now made in this country, or capable of being made in this country, when it was only 1% at the beginning.
But that's irrelevant. If it's why are you choosing these companies? You know, if a company is able to produce PPE from outside the UK, and they're able to deliver it, then that's not a problem. The goal should be actually getting quality PPE, and in many cases they were getting deliveries of PPE, and I've covered this as well, deliveries of PPE that was not fit for purpose.
Of the pandemic, and it's entirely typical, I may say, of Captain Hindsight, that he now attacks
Captain Hindsight. Oh my God.
Our efforts to procure PPE, says we went too fast. When he now says that says then that we were not going fast enough, and now says that we went too fast.
It's not about going too fast. It's about giving out contracts to people who are connected to your party. It's corruption. They were not saying, well, we should allow corruption just to get PPE. They never said that.
Make his mind up.
Keir Starmer.
He talks about hindsight. I say catch up. I called for a circuit breaker. The Prime Minister stood there and said it'd be a disaster. He wasn't going to do it. Then he caught up and did exactly that just a few weeks later. We've now got a longer, harder lockdown as a result of his delay, so I won't take that from him. Last week, the Prime Minister couldn't explain how his government ended up paying £150 million on contracts that didn't deliver a single piece of usable PPE. This week, he's effectively defending the paying of £21 million on a contract with no oversight.
Call it for what it is, Keir. Call it out. It's corruption. Say the word.
This morning, the Independent National Audit Office concluded that the government's approach was, in their words, diminished public transparency. They reported that more than half of all contracts relating to the pandemic, Mr Speaker, that's totalling £10.5 billion, were handed out without competitive tender, and that suppliers with political connections were 10 times more likely to be awarded contracts. Mr Speaker, we're 8 months into this crisis, and the government is still making the same mistakes. Can the Prime Minister give a cast-iron assurance that from now on, all government contracts will be subject to proper process with full transparency and accountability?
You're basically asking the Conservative Party not to be corrupt. You're asking Boris Johnson, will you now no longer be corrupt? I think that's a tall order.
Mr. Speaker, all government contracts are, of course, going to be published in a due way, and are already being published. But again,
being published is not the issue, Boris. The issue is, why were those contracts given to companies that in many cases were not able to produce PPE, were not able to produce quality PPE? In many cases, they were given to they were handed out to companies who had already failed. Randox was one of them. They failed and they were given another contract without a tender. And I've talked about this before. It's like, our corruption, you can view the corruption on a website, so then it's not really corruption. Just because there's a certain level of transparency that you can actually see the corruption. The corruption is the problem, not that we can actually see it.
And I must say, I think it's extraordinary that he now attacks the government for securing PPE in huge quantities. And I want to thank again all the people who are involved in that effort. Lord Dighton, literally thousands of others who built up a mountain of PPE against any further crisis. And he talks about transparency and moving too fast to secure contracts. As you should know, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster actually wrote to the government attacking us for failing to approach various companies, including a football agent who was apparently offering to supply ventilators. And
no, I don't know if this is true or not, because this is in Parliament. Boris Johnson doesn't actually have to tell the truth. Isn't it interesting that he's raising this issue at the end, after Keir Starmer has the possibility to respond? Keir Starmer can't respond anymore. It's his time is over. So Boris Johnson can use this moment to grandstand, to lie, and not be held accountable. I think it should actually work the other way, that the leader of the opposition should be the one who finishes, not the Prime Minister. Because then Boris Johnson just uses this time to promote himself and to lie.
Historical clothing manufacturing company who's offering to make 175 gowns per week, and whose current range includes 16th century silk bodices. Again, Mr. Speaker, at the time he bashed the government for not moving fast enough. It's absolutely absurd that he's now, in hindsight, he's now once again trying to score party political points.
Trying to score points, party political points. Boris Johnson is saying this.
Political points by attacking us for moving too fast. I'm proud of what we did to secure huge quantities of PPE during a pandemic. Any government would do the same.
And then we have it over. So, doesn't really go anywhere. Boris Johnson is asked a question. He responds by talking about something else, or he just uses it as an opportunity to lie about the opposition. I hope you enjoyed Prime Minister's questions this time. Let's see what they have to talk about next week. Let me know in the comments let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.